All right, now that we've spent a lot of time building our understanding about what decimals are, that they really are just fractions. They're either fractions in the tenths, fractions in the hundredths, or as you continue, you'll do the thousandths and etc. But right now we're sticking with the tenths and the hundredths. Well, now that we know what decimals are, how does that help us and what can we do with that? One of the biggest things that we can do is we can work on comparing them. We can look at different numbers, different mixed numbers, and that will help us to know which one is more, which one is less, and go from there. Now, when I'm looking at this, I want to make sure that I know how I would use that. A lot of times it's dealing with measurement. If you're measuring 4 different things and you get 4 different numbers, you need to be able to know which one is more and which one is less. That all goes back to our understanding of decimals. So let's put down 4 different numbers. Also on your paper, I want you to draw 4 different tape diagrams. I've stacked them on top of each other because I think that makes it a little bit easier for us to compare sizes. But if you don't want to stack it on top of each other, you don't have to. Okay, so once you have your tape diagrams, go ahead and keep watching the rest of the video. So we're going to work with these 4 numbers, just starting off. We'll work with 2/10, 65 hundredths, 7/10, and 46 hundredths. Okay. Now there's a lot of different ways that we could compare them. I mean, in my head right away, I think about what these look like as a fraction. This is 2/10 or 20 hundredths. This one right here is 65 hundredths. Right here I have 7/10 or 70 hundredths. And this one right here is 46 hundredths. Well, when I look at them all with similar denominators, now all of a sudden it's really easy to know which one is the greatest, which one is the least. What I want you to do is, looking at that, circle on your paper which number is the greatest. Well, right now I know that 70 hundredths is the greatest because it's the one that's closest to filling up all of the 100 pieces needed to make my whole. Now put a star next to the least. Well, I know that 20 hundredths is the least because it's the one that's farthest away from my whole, or it's closest to 0. It just doesn't have as many pieces. There's 20 pieces here, there's 70 pieces here. It's pretty easy to tell. So that's one way we can look at it, is understanding, hey, these decimals, they really are just fractions, and we're so comfortable with our fractions, we can compare those pretty easily. Now, another way that we could look at it is we could actually draw pictures of them. We can show what they look like. So let's go ahead and let's show what 2/10 looks like. 2/10. Okay. I'm going to, let's do, yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna figure out my colors. Okay, let's do yellow. All right, how many tenths should I shade in if I have 2/10? I'll do 2. So shade in 2/10. Okay, so we know how much that is. Great. Now, let's change our marker. Let's do 65 hundredths. Okay, so here it's a little bit harder because these are broken into tenths. So my first step is I could color in how many hundredths I need. Oop, let's move this over here. Okay, I have my tenths. I know how many tenths I need. I need 6. So shade in 6 tenths. Oh, I want to change my marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I'm not done there because I have 5 hundredths that I haven't shaded in. Now, again, if I really needed to get very, very specific, I could cut this 10th piece into 10 smaller pieces to represent hundredths. I don't need to get that specific because I know I have 5 hundredths, and that means that it is right in the middle. So I'm just going to draw a line right in the middle, and then I'll shade in the rest. So this right here represents 65 hundredths. Okay, let's do another one. Our next one is 7 tenths. And that means I have, okay, let's shade in, ooh, I don't really like that color. Let's change colors. Okay, let's shade in 7 tenths. That's really easy because this is a 10th piece. So how many pieces of these do I need to shade in? 7. So 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, and 7 tenths. Very easy. Next, let's do our last number, which is 46 hundredths. Again, same process where all I have to do is shade in, first off, 4 tenths. So I have 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths. And then I'm not done there because I've got my 6 hundredths. Now I know, like right now it doesn't really matter because all of our fractions and decimals are so far off. But again, I could think to myself, okay, well 6 hundredths is just a step further than my halfway point. So here's my half mark, and I'm just gonna shade in right here. Okay, and I'll shade in the rest. And this right here is 46 hundredths. Now it is so easy to see which one is greater, which one is less than. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to write these fractions in order from least to greatest on our place value chart. Okay, so which one is the least, the smallest? Well, we have, when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at this one right here. It's the one that's closest to 0 and farthest from 1. So let's see if I can get back to yellow. I'm going to come over here. How many tenths did I have? I had 2 tenths. Okay, what's the next one that was the next closest to 0? Well, that one's still pretty far, that one's still pretty far, but right here, my 46 hundredths, that one was the next closest to 0. So how many tenths did I have? I had 1, 2, 3, 4. How many hundredths did I have? Again, I can't really tell because I didn't break it all up, but I know that I had 6 hundredths. Okay? Then, what's the next greatest? Well, when I'm looking, I want to find the one that is, again, closest to 0. So I'm looking, and this one is closest to 1, so I know this will be my greatest. And this one is my next greatest. So, when I have 65 hundredths, how many tenths do I have? I have 6 tenths, and I know that because I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many hundredths do I have? I have 5 hundredths. Okay, and then finally I have my 7 tenths. And that one's really easy. It's closest to 1. How many tenths do I have? I have 7. And there I go. I have my fractions from least to greatest, from closest to 0 to closest to 1. Okay, so let's look at just a few more examples. And in these examples, we're only going to be comparing 2 fractions at a time. So let's look at, or 2 decimals at a time, I should say. Let's look at 3. This number right here is just 3. Yeah, it shows a decimal point, and it shows a 0 after it, but it's saying, hey, I don't have any tenths here, so it's just 3. And we're going to compare it to 3 and 9 tenths. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to first think about what numbers I have here. Because these are a little bit different than our last example because these numbers are mixed. They have a hole. Now, lucky for us, these holes are the same size, so it's almost like they don't really count. And again, we're going to look at our decimals. So let's pretend, starting right here, that all the way back here is our 1, 2, 3, and this point right here is our 3, our whole. This is 3. Everything else, that was 0, 1, 2, now we're at 3. Okay, if I'm going to do, actually, no, I want this one. Just 3. Okay, well, how many tenths should I shade in? 0. I don't have any. So, I'm not going to shade anything in because I don't have it. Now, let's compare it to 3 and 9 tenths. Okay, well, how many tenths should I shade in? 9. So let's shade in 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 tenths. Now it's really easy to see which one is greater and which one is less, because right here is not 0, it's 3, and then over here is not 1, it's 4. So my 3 and 9 tenths is way closer to 4 than it is to 3. But let's just take a second and let's write it in our place value chart. Okay, now we do have ones when I'm writing my 3 on my 3 and 1 and 9 tenths. So we're going to say we have 3. And then I could put 0 and 0. Again, this isn't 300. This is just 3. Well, our next number is 3 and 9 tenths. When I look at that, it makes it so much easier for me to tell which one is greater because, okay, if I'm going to compare, I want to compare my biggest units. Well, my biggest unit is my ones. It's the same thing. So then my next biggest unit is my tenths, and I have 9/10 compared to 0/10. This one is greater. So I could say 3 is, let's erase those. 3 is less than 3/9, or I could also flip it and say 3 and 9/10 is greater than 3. Okay, last example. We're going to compare 1 and 51/100ths and 1 and 52/100ths. Well, when I'm looking again, I recognize, hey, my biggest place value is the same. So, and I'm actually let's go ahead and write these numbers in our place value chart. I have 1/1, I have 5/10, and I have 100ths. With my 1 and 52/100ths, I have 1/1, 5/10, and 200ths. Looking at this, we say, okay, if we're comparing, we want to look at the biggest place value first. My ones are equal. They are the same. My tenths are equal. They are also the same. And my hundredths, that's where I have a difference. I have 200ths here, and I only have 100th here. So which one is closer to my next whole? 2, the one where I have more of my pieces, more of my parts. So 1 and 52/100ths is greater. So I could say 1 and 52/100ths is greater than 1 and 51/100ths. Or I could flip it and say 1 and 51/100ths is less than 1 and 52/100ths. All right, remember to do your exit ticket. You did a great job. Remember, when you're comparing fractions, you want to compare the biggest place value first, and then go down the place values to see which one moves you closer to the next whole. Good job.